I think Jim Acosta is a very unprofessional man. I think he does this with everybody. He gets paid to do that. You know, he gets paid to burst in. He's a very unprofessional guy. Whether it was me or Ronald Reagan or anybody else, he would have done the same thing. Look, I don't think he's a smart person, but he's got a loud voice. And here, wait, David, do you mind if I answer the question? And as far as I'm concerned, I haven't made that decision, but it could be others also. When you're in the White House, this is a very sacred place to me. This is a very special place. You have to treat the White House with respect. You have to treat the presidency with respect. If you've ever seen him dealing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it's a disgrace. And he does it for, you know, the reason. The same thing with April Ryan. I watch her get up. I mean, you talk about somebody that's a loser. She doesn't know what the hell she's doing. She gets publicity, and then she gets a pay raise, or she gets a contract with, I think, CNN. But she's very nasty, and she shouldn't be. She shouldn't be. You've got to treat the White House and the office of the presidency with respect.
Let's bring in Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary and a Fox News contributor. Ari, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Well, where do we begin? You've been listening to the show. You've been following the news this morning. It's a tough moment right now.
Yeah, there's just so much going on in Washington and the normal turmoil after a midterm where people try to figure out what comes next.
I'm sure you saw the press conference yesterday, that the exchange that's getting a lot of attention. We asked Kellyanne Conway about that last hour. She was with us and said the following about reporters at the White House and the job they're trying to do. And you, as a former White House press secretary, you're very keen on this topic, so I'll get you to react after we hear from Kellyanne. Watch.
There are journalists here at the White House and the White House press corps who every single day try to do their job by getting the story. Others try to get the president. They shall remain nameless right now. I think that some people like to grandstand and be part of the story. There's no question about that. We hear that from other journalists.
It went on from there, but what is your feeling on this as you watched it?
Well, two things. Number one, there was no physical contact that was anything bothersome. You know, that was incidental contact, and I think that was a false reason for pulling his pass. But second, Jim Acosta has had a long history of being an editorial writer in that room, not a fair or neutral questioner. Tough questions, challenging questions are the job of White House reporters. But when he starts giving his opinion and using that podium as the place to do it, it's wrong. And that's why the White House did this. And I support that. I cannot defend Jim Acosta. When he says to the President of the United States in the middle of a news conference, it's not an invasion. That's his opinion. And if he wants to be an editorial writer, more power to him. If he wants to be a columnist or have a nighttime TV show to give his opinion, more power to him. But that is not the job of White House reporters. And I think the White House finally got fed up with him using his perch at the White House to give personal opinions.
Yeah, well, both have put out their reaction to that. CNN, the White House put out this statement: revoking access to the White House complex is a reaction out of line to the purported offense and is unacceptable. I'm sorry, so this is the White House Correspondents Association. Journalists may use a range of approaches to carry out their jobs, and the WHCA does not police the tone or frequency of those questions. Its members ask of powerful senior government officials, including the president. Such interactions, however uncomfortable they may appear to be, help define the strength of our national institutions.
Let's start with Jim Acosta and the CNN correspondent's conduct when President Trump called on him at that presser. You were there in that room with President Bush. Was this different than the kinds of questions that Bush got?
Totally different. You know, it's one thing for reporters to be challenging, to be tough. That's their job. They do it all the time. It's another thing for them to use that room or the briefing room to espouse their personal policy preferences, their individual points of view. And that's what Jim Acosta has been doing since Donald Trump became president. And I think that, more than anything involving that physical altercation, which really was a nothing altercation, I think that is the rub of the matter. That's what's.
But then he kept on talking. Like I'm talking over you now. He wouldn't give up the mic. But at the same time, was it an overreach or a misstep for the White House to suspend his credentials? Because that shifted the whole spotlight from whatever Jim Acosta did or didn't do to whether the White House is being punitive toward the press.
Look, in the Bush White House, you know, what I would have done was I'd have tried to just take advantage of that moment and say, well, Jim, I hope you get your op-ed published in the newspaper tonight. And then on to the next reporter and let them ask a question. I would deflect and try to use a little humor and try to make everybody laugh at him for being an obvious editorial writer instead of a neutral journalist. But the Trump White House does everything differently, and I'm not going to defend Jim Acosta. It is not the role of White House reporters to express their opinion. He makes other reporters in the room look bad when he's the one out there expressing his opinion, because that type of thing just amplifies onto everybody. The public hates it. Ask a question, ask a hard question. And you know what, Howie? What he could have done was simply, instead of saying the caravan is not an invasion, Mr. President, he could have said critics say,
some say, as opposed to I'm debating you.
The White House pulled the credentials from CNN reporter Jim Acosta after this ridiculous display at the White House on Wednesday.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to challenge you on one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign in the midterms.
Here we go.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, the caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate it.
Why did you characterize it as such?
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in this election to try to keep...
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process, and I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your campaign...
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
Right. But your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and so on.
Well, that's true. But they weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. Right. These were people. This was an actual, it happened a few days ago. And
they're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better.
If I may ask one other question, Mr. President, if I may ask one other question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President, I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have...
I'm not concerned about anything with the
Russian
investigation because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN.
Joining me now with reaction, conservative filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza and media reporter for The Hill, Joe Concha. So I just want to start off, before we get to the whole arm push, whether it was or whether it wasn't. This is the President of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief, and he can characterize something happening at our border however he wants. It's an invasion, it's an incursion, it's an intrusion. He has authority over the border when it comes to national security. Remember Barack Obama? In Benghazi, he said that terrorist attack was a protest over a video. Now, that was an extreme mischaracterization of the truth, and the media never challenged him on that at all. They let him slide on that. So to have Acosta come up over a difference of opinion, over a choice of words, and try to argue with the president in such a rude and disrespectful way, I thought was uncalled for. And just yanking the press pass is basically just saying, listen, Jim, get on the timeout, cool off for a second, and we'll let you back next week. Dinesh, what do you think?
Well, first of all, the exchange, this to me was highly entertaining. It reminded me of some of the skirmishes between Reagan and Sam Donaldson from the old days, except Reagan and Sam Donaldson were grown-ups. Now, the funny thing here, I think with Jim Acosta, I'd have to say, I'm looking at an overgrown infant. I don't know if this is medically possible that you physically grow, but emotionally you remain an infant, and intellectually, because when you're an emotional infant, you want to grab something, you don't want to stop, you don't know enough, you want another cookie, another piece of candy, and you won't take no for an answer. And the other thing is, you have a sense of entitlement and arrogance because you don't have...
He thinks he's above everybody else in that room. He thinks it's the Jim Acosta show, and he's there to trade barbs with the President of the United States. And if he gets called out for it, he's the victim. He thinks he's the Rosa Parks of the press corps, and he's too dramatic. I don't know Jim Acosta. I've never met him. He seems like a fine guy personally, but his behavior is totally out of line. And Joe, taking a press pass away isn't attacking the First Amendment. It's just telling the guy, hey, behave yourself and conduct yourself with a little bit more decorum and have a little bit more respect for the presidency.
I'm glad you played the entire clip, because all I've seen is the microphone exchange. If you watch the clip, he tries to ask Acosta 4 different questions. The way a press conference like this works, if you're a White House correspondent, you get 1 question and maybe a follow-up, maybe a second question. As you said, it's not his show. There are dozens of other reporters in there. Good ones, by the way. John Carl, ABC, Jeff Mason, Reuters, John Robertson, Fox News, Hallie Jackson, NBC. They're not trying to ask 4 questions in this case. And remember the way Acosta started that. He says, I want to challenge you. And then he goes into a lecture around whether it's an invasion or not. This is a mid-40s version of the captain of the debate team. Right? And that's not
And look how
his
many
job.
questions the president took. He took 68 questions from 35 reporters. And Dinesh, Jim Acosta just wants to monopolize the whole thing. I think if you want to go up there and ask a question, fine. If you have a follow-up, see if you can squeeze it in. But to say to the commander-in-chief, you know what, I'm running the press conference. You don't get to decide when you want to move on to another reporter. I'm the one holding the mic. I get to decide when the President of the United States wants to move on to another reporter. Who does he think he is?
Well, I think what Trump finds maddening, and this explains the sharpness of the way Trump responded, is I think Trump recognizes that this same press corps, with Acosta in the lead perhaps, was just lapdog sycophantic to Obama.
Right.
And they are unremittingly hostile to Trump. Now, they have the right to do that, but to pretend that they're not doing that, to pretend that they're just being objective and, quote, doing their job, when the transparent bias, the agenda is so obvious to anyone watching, I think that's what Trump finds
They have
maddening.
no credibility because they treated both presidents totally differently. And then just lastly, real quick, I guess the White House is being accused of altering or doctoring that video or something like that. I don't know what they did or not. All I know is that if you look at it in real time, he has the mic in the one hand and he pulls his arm down on the woman's arm, and you can see it go down. So he's obviously provoking a physical confrontation.
I don't even think it's even the point, really, what happened with the microphone. This is 2 years of Acosta doing this. It is built to this crescendo. And let me go back to Neil Monroe. He was with the Daily Caller, and he interrupted President Obama in 2012. I asked your producers to put together a couple of headlines here as far as the reaction when he interrupted the president once. Politico, Obama interrupted by heckling reporter. Who is Neil Monroe, and why is he interrupting the president? The Atlantic. And finally, this is the best one from Mediaite. CNN White House reporter. Obama heckler let him sound passionate. That White House reporter wasn't Jim Acosta. I don't hear anybody calling Jim Acosta a heckler now.
One man's heckler is another man's hero. All right, guys, I got to run. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you. And God bless America.